Pete, just wanted to start by kind of cast your mind back to 1994, number 2 in the world rankings, knocking on the door of number 1 in Jansher Khan, because you were the sort of number 1 in waiting, and 12 months later you could barely pick up a racket. Just take me back and give me a flavour of what was going on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was number 2 in the world in 94, so I was 23, so also pretty young as well. And I've been kind of rising up the rankings, steadily getting higher and higher. And I got to a position where Jansher Khan was number 1, I was number 2. Jansher had been number 1 for a good few years, won multiple British Opens and World Opens. But I was getting to a stage where I was starting to make some inroad, some challenged him. And obviously he was extremely dominant. Like him and Jahangir Khan were two of the most dominant players. Some people say 2 of the best players ever. But I was starting to, make some progression. And we had a few big battles, 3-2 battles. So I felt like I was, starting to get a little bit close. And he was actually, so I was 23. He was 30, 29, 30 at the time. And in those days, 30 odd years ago, probably 30, 31, people might play a little bit past that, but that was often the ceiling. So yeah, that's why people were thinking, I'm 23, he's coming towards the end, although obviously still an unbelievable player. So it's, it seemed like a potential time to, take over the reins. But it was extremely difficult. Obviously, number 2 in the world, that was great. But then I first of all got glandular fever, probably at the start of the season, of the 94 season, and then took a bit of a rest, but I didn't rest for long enough, because I had this, this kind of almost obsession in my brain that I wanted to challenge Jansher and get back and get fit and get back on the circuit, and it came back too quickly, really, looking back on it. And I was having to, like all these top guys now, it's unbelievable physical sport. You've got to be top of your fitness level. So you're always trying to work harder, train harder, get an extra, extra bit out of your body. And with me not quite recovering from this glandular fever, which is a virus in your body, and then doing all the, the unbelievably tough training on top, I was getting more and more fatigued, and I managed to kind of keep my game together. But the last tournament I played before I took a really long extended break was the British Open. Managed to get to the final, just about get to the final, but it was, I knew it wasn't 100%. And then I played Jansher in the final. This is the 95 British Open, actually, in Cardiff, got to the final and lost 3-love in probably 25 minutes, which was unusual, very unusual at that particular stage. He might beat me, but it was going to be often a long game, long match. And I just didn't have anything physically left at all in me. And then, match finished, and I kind of had liver pains, because that was all linked to the glandular fever, because your body's not getting rid of the kind of the toxins out of your body. So I had like an enlarged liver, and the effort of the few months before that, but also that tournament as well, just basically meant that I was, I didn't basically pick up a racket for another 2 years after that. So I was kind of out the game, and obviously my ranking was number 2. I went completely, right to the very bottom again. And then, that was, my window of time, looking back on it to kind of get to the top, but it was, unfortunately kind of cut short. So I never really recovered. Actually, someone told me a stat the other day of people having something similar to me, chronic fatigue. I think it was something like, 2 or 3% of people actually ever really properly recover. So it was a hard thing to, extremely hard thing to get over.
How does that actually, manifest itself on a day-to-day basis? You're talking about kind of being physically tired, but actually day-to-day outside of tournaments, just normal life. How does it manifest?
Yeah, well, it's a strange illness, really, because it's hard to get any testing for it. So it's hard to be 100% certain what is wrong with you. But I got diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. And you just feel completely exhausted the whole time. That's the best way to describe it. You wake up in the morning and, a good night's sleep, but you just wake up and you've just got no energy whatsoever. So I'd kind of wake up, go for a bit of a walk, and then just feel like all I wanted to do was go back to bed again, basically. And I had, you still had some symptoms from the glandular fever, so swollen glands and things like that. But it was the extreme exhaustion, tiredness from not actually, I wasn't even doing it. I'm trying to rest, but I'm just not recovering, and that's the pattern of chronic fatigue syndrome. They're still not 100% certain why it continues for so long. So even the kind of scientists now haven't quite worked it out. They think it's something to do with the kind of the mitochondria in your muscles not working properly, or maybe a virus gets into them, and you just can't kind of oxygen doesn't get to the muscles properly and the brain as well, and that's the thing that causes the tiredness. But people still, scientists still aren't 100% certain what it actually is, which is frustrating, because then it's hard to get a proper diagnosis and treatment. So you've got all of that then going on to who do I go and see to get better? And it's not like I've been injured before. I'm not saying an injury is a nice thing to have. It's not at all. But often you've got a diagnosis and a prognosis about how you've got a rehab program you go through, and so you can see. But this for me was
path.
Yeah, there's a path, but I couldn't see a path. So that was. And it's very difficult. I saw lots of different experts. Very difficult to get the right advice to understand, what to actually do as well. So, so all of that was obviously, challenging time for me.
Was that going on through that entire 94-95 season, or did it just come to a head at that British Open?
It came to a head at the British Open, but it was, it was kind of manifesting itself throughout the season as well. So I knew I wasn't, quite 100%. It's also quite strange as well, because although I knew I wasn't 100%, because I, was physically very fit, I could and mentally strong, I could push myself. So which is a double-edged sword. It's great, obviously, to be if you want to be a top squash player, you've got to be mentally strong and physically be able to push yourself. But it's not good to do that if you're, you've got an illness or a virus inside you, and then you're still pushing yourself. So, that was almost my strength was also my undoing in a way, because I kept on, being able to manage to keep mentally pushing through when really I should have stopped, and many months before that British Open, and taken a few months off, maybe even 6 months off, and then I'm still super young, so it wouldn't really have affected my career, and then come back. But obviously easy to say that in hindsight.
I assume then through that season, if you're feeling, almost if the energy level's 100% at the end of the 94 season, it's almost like the battery's being depleted week by week, and you get to zero.
Yeah. You kind of, it was on a bit of a downhill trajectory. Yeah, you're right. And I play tournaments, kind of recover, but just, you kind of, most athletes are very in tune with their body. So they know when something isn't right. And I knew something wasn't right, but I probably just didn't want to kind of admit it to myself. And it was tough, because obviously when you're young, it's everything, time seems shorter. So all you're thinking about is the next tournament. I'm thinking about, I want to get to number 1 in the world, and I want to, challenge Jansher. So, you've got that kind of pressure in your head that you want to keep going.
I'm assuming as well, if you're still managing to play and the tank is being depleted, but you're still getting results and you're still getting performances, and it's not affecting your ability to hit the ball.
Yeah.
It's almost a kind of, if you've got an ankle injury, you can play through it. So was the mindset kind of, I'll just keep pushing and it'll get better? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so that was a tough thing. Like you say, if you've got an injury that puts you out the game, that puts you out the game. So it's quite black and white that, you can't play. I mean, sometimes you have an injury where you can kind of carry on and you've got that challenge as well. But yeah, this was... Yeah, it was unusual because you've got, you kind of think, well, I can still play and I can still compete, and I'm actually still winning, quite a few matches. But I know I'm not 100% as well, and I'm potentially going kind of backwards physically. So it's hard to then, take yourself out of that situation and go, well, actually the best thing for me to do is take a break and take a rest.
Was it sort of a medical intervention to say you need to take this time off, or was it just yourself and your own body, and that's how, were you trying to play every couple of weeks?
I was trying to play, but it was, it got to the point where I suppose the decision was made for me, because physically I just get out of bed in the morning, and I would just, go for a walk, and I'm just exhausted. By lunchtime, I'm going back to bed. So that decision was taken away from me to think I could even play, because there was no chance I could play. I was kind of feeling that bad that it was just, physically there was no chance of me doing kind of any exercise. Never mind trying to be a professional squash player. So it was obviously, it's obviously unbelievably tough because you go from being probably one of the fittest sports people in squash, maybe in the world, considering how tough squash is, to then, in the mid-20s, not being able to get out of bed. It's not, it's the transition is not, it's a difficult thing to process. It's either you then got that as well, the mindset, the mental challenge of it all is, you've got to try and think. You've got to try and think in the most positive way to, hopefully get out of it one day. But then it becomes a mental battle as well. It's a physical battle to start with, and it quite quickly turns into a physical battle and a mental challenge as well to see how you're gonna.
I can only imagine, the first few months. I can imagine, I'll get through this, but 12 months later, still having the same thing. That mentally, that could lead to a very dark place.
It did, yeah. It did, and it probably led to some, form of depression. I would say that, because it's your, it's you probably place so much emphasis on that's who you are.
Well, your entire your identity
exactly your identity. That's the word. Yeah, it's that is that was my identity, and my identity was a squash player, and also my identity was in my mind, I'm someone who works hard. I'm super fit, and that's kind of who I am. That's how I thought of myself. And then you think actually I'm now completely opposite to what I used to, how I kind of perceive myself. So that in itself is hard, especially when you're young. When you're at that age as well, it's just hard to get it into fathom it out in your brain what to do, and how to, like I say, how to cope with it. And back then in the 90s, there was a lot less understanding of the I'm sure now it'd be easier to get like a psychologist to help work with you, or even the medical side would be different and better as well in terms of advice. So yeah, a lot of it as well was kind of trial and error, and especially.
And I assume as well as being obviously frustrated that you're not able to do what you're doing, you're also watching Jansher winning, and then other people coming through. Your Peter Nichols, etc., starting to come on the scene. So there must have been a lot of mental frustration to see other people then taking your spot as well.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to try and not feel envious and put that to one side. But it's just a natural reaction. Obviously, I tried to not watch that much squash. I just couldn't take I couldn't take watching squash because it was just I mean, it wasn't like it is now with the squash TV, but there was, some highlights and some matches you could watch, but I couldn't, it was too much for me to watch and think, because actually what happened then during that 2-year period, Jansher then really was, coming to the end of his career. Peter, you had people like Peter Nichols, Jonathan Power coming up, taking over. So in my mind, I'm thinking, obviously, they're unbelievable players, but you kind of think, well, this is my era to compete with them, so that's a great opportunity for me to compete with those kind of guys and, challenge for top titles, and they're then doing it and winning everything, and I'm, stuck at home and not, and not being able to play. So it's,
but 2 years later, you do step back on court, 300 or so in the world rankings. I mean, what changed, or what happened to sort of get you back on court? What's the process?
Yeah, I mean, I did, I did, probably a year I saw no recovery whatsoever, no improvement really. I then started to feel better. I started to get back up to, being able to get back onto court and train a little bit, and it was a very gradual process, but I was improving, recovering, getting stronger, which was all very, very positive. And probably after 15, 16 months I was back on court a little bit and training a little bit, and trying to get back to play, and taking rest, lots of rest days to make sure I'd recover. But then so it was a very, very gradual process after that kind of first year. And then I built it up, and I thought, looking back at it, I never got back to physically feeling 100%, but I think I got to a stage where I just thought, I can either give it another go, or I, just call it quits, basically. Yeah. So, and also there was there's like I said before, there's the mental side of it as well. So then you start thinking, is this a mental thing, or is it now, is it a physical thing, or is it more a mental thing? And I'm thinking in my mind, I think I should be recovered now. Maybe it's more of a mental problem. and that's why I'm feeling kind of tired on top of the initial physical issue. So I thought, I made a decision to myself, so okay, well, let's just give it a go and kind of see what happens, and start slowly, obviously, and play a few. I just started to play a few kind of local matches within like a local English league matches, and then kind of gradually kind of built it up and then started to play some qualifying events, PSA qualifying events, and then kind of went on from there. So I was gradually, but it was a different. I was having to manage everything very, very carefully. So I might play one match and then take a bit of a break, or maybe in a qualifying tournament, but then take quite an extended break, and then just then just gradually try and kind of build it up over time.
There must have been a lot of frustration doing that as well, though, to be back on court but not being quite the guy you were 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's a different mindset as well, because I was used to, my mindset was, I'm going to train harder than everybody else and work harder than everyone else, and that gave me confidence to think that, I've then got the.
You've done the work.
I've done the work to be able to beat, to beat players. That always isn't a great mentality, because that's, even if I hadn't got ill, that probably you can't sustain that for forever anyway. But that was my mentality when I was, like I say, in my early 20s. Then I've got to readjust mentally and think, actually, now I can't do that anymore. So I've got to think of a new way of, approaching the game and a new mindset to try and just even get back and compete. So that was a shift. I had to make a shift in terms of mentally how I was approaching the game, how I was approaching training and competing, and so that was an interesting process to go through.
And am I right in saying that sort of you had a bit of an insurance setup as well? I mean, I've read about it in a few articles back in the day, but there was quite a large amount of money put on the table that for you never to play squash again.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. It was slightly unusual, actually, the way it all came about. I had a manager who actually managed. He was very switched on. He managed some footballers, also a couple of Formula One drivers as well. Gerhard Berger, you might not remember his name, but he was a Formula One driver back in the day, and he was his manager, and he kind of said to me, probably kind of in '93, actually, he said, well, these are the sports people that I manage, I'm an agent for, they've got insurance. Have you ever thought about it? I said, well, never even crossed my mind. So he kind of persuaded, so, well, I think, squash is, it's any sport, any professional sport, if you, it's, there's obviously a risk to it, I can sort you out with a kind of an insurance package, just, so if you're injured or ill, you can at least there might be some backup for you financially if you can't. Worst case scenario, you can't. You kind of can't play.
And you would only have been about 21 at the time.
21, 22. Yeah, but then what the situation was? So I was out for a long time, and then for this 2-year period, and then I started to come back, and the insurance company said to me, you're out the game. If you don't play ever again, literally you retire now, there's a pot of money, a big, at that time, a reasonably big pot of money. I think from memory, it was something like £250,000, something like that, which is a big pot of money, because it's if I don't pick up a racket, but if I play, even if I play one match, then that's out the window. I can't claim the I can't claim my insurance, payout, because you then gone back into, I don't know exactly how the contract worked, but you then go back into the sport, and then that means that's null and void the contract. So people ask me about that. Actually, that was one of the easiest decisions I ever had to make. There was no question I was ever going to, even though I wasn't 100%. That was for me to kind of think, actually, I'll take some money, but I'll never play squash again. That wasn't an option in my mind at that time.
Even though, £250,000 20, 30 years ago was a lot of cash for an athlete. An athlete's window is very short anyway.
Exactly, no, it wasn't even. I can honestly say that it wasn't even a second thought. It was, like I say, it's one of the easiest decisions I ever had to make. It was. I'm not going to give up a hope of. To me, that was like dashing all hopes of ever doing anything again. Okay, you might have some money, but you've kind of,
you're almost selling your dream.
You've stopped your dream, particularly, and you've obviously, the back of my mind, I've always got the dream of coming back and playing and whatever. So that was easy decision for me.
So you come back 2 years back in the top 10, and then the symptoms reappear, or it was always that they were there?
It was always there, really. Yeah, to be honest, I never got back to being 100%. But obviously, I got back to being being able to play and compete, and like you say, I got back to top 10 in the world, and was competing, and but it was kind of sporadic in a way. So like I might play 2 or 3 tournaments and then have to take quite a bit of a rest and then come back a bit, and play. And, I was doing, reasonably well. I won some tournaments and got to some semi-finals and finals of big tournaments, but it wasn't, it wasn't the same process. It wasn't the same trajectory as what I was on, before I got ill.
And then I think you had another sort of two year.
Yeah, I had another 2. So got to put. So I came back, and I had some interesting matches, some interesting situations. I had to qualify for tournaments. I actually came back to probably 4 or 5 months into my comeback. I came back and played the World Open in Malaysia, and I had to qualify because I had no ranking. So qualified. I ended up playing Jonathan Power in the quarterfinal, and at the time him and Peter Nicol were, maybe Jansher was still there, but they were definitely, the 1, 2, 3 in the world standard. Might have even overtaken Jansher at the time. So I played I played Jonathan Power in the quarterfinal of the World Open, and he probably was favourite, I would say, to win that year. He was the player that everyone was excited about. He was a new player from Canada, unbelievably talented, quite a unique, charismatic player. So yeah, I played him in the quarterfinal, and so that was quite an interesting matchup because I was coming back, hadn't played him before, and I'm coming from a slightly different era, I suppose. He's the kind of the new kid on the block.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, we played, and I did actually manage to win, but it was that tournament. I had to qualify, like I said, beat Jonathan Power, and then it was this similar situation to the British Open. Literally, the match finished, or even kind of during the match, I kind of knew that I'm kind of giving everything here, and my body's not probably going to recover from this. And then that was the start of another 2 years out. So yeah, I got back to top 10, played obviously unbelievably well in that tournament, and then cycle of another 2 years of being out the game.
Wow.
So yeah, that was, yeah. So I was at that point, I probably was 25, 26. So still,
still young,
still very, very young. Yeah.
And did you try and come back again?
I did, yeah. I did come back again. So this was the last comeback. This will stop the story. But yeah, that was the last. It was a similar process, similar situation. Recover, took a long time to recover, but eventually got back to a certain, physical level where I thought I could compete again. Came back. I actually got back again into the top 10, 12 in the world from qualifying, and then same thing, quite sporadic, playing some tournaments, stopping, and then eventually I then stopped. Actually, got to the age of 29, 30, and I just thought, I just can't keep doing this. I've got to kind of retire and take an extended break and just recover, basically.
Prior to that point, the first 2 years off the comeback, the next 2 years off the comeback, was the mind still saying, I am good enough to be world number 1, and that's what I'm going to do?
I think so. Yeah, I was hoping so. Yeah, in the back of my mind, I was, I'm thinking, yeah, that's still the possibility. And I'm still, from having 2 years out to then come back and compete against people like Jonathan Power, it gives you confidence that, well, actually, even it's a really strange thing, because it's, you don't think you're quite 100%, but actually, you've got these other players who probably not at their peak yet. So there is a bit of a window to still, compete and get to the top. So that's always back. When I came back, the same thing happened. But then I did realise, I just thought, actually, I'm not quite right, and I don't think I've got a chance of getting to the very top again. And obviously, all those other players are also improving and getting better and better. And I just thought that was always my goal, to get to number 1 in the world. And I just thought, I can't. That's not going to realistically. That isn't going to happen. And I think when that clicked in my brain, I made the decision. I could keep trying to keep doing the same thing, but it wouldn't be satisfying because I know I'm not 100%. I know I can't compete against the very top guys.
Yeah, sure.
Even maybe on the odd one-off match, maybe, but it's just not a consistent. Consistently, I kind of.
When you look back at where you were at number 2 at 23 years of age, I mean, is there still a bit of a, what if my body had complied, what could have been?
So less and less, I would say, as the years go on. It was obviously hard during the time, and when I retired properly, it was a very difficult period because you kind of then reflecting on your career and going, initially just thinking it's a disappointment. That's how I had it in my own head. I'm just disappointed that the way it all turned out. But as time goes on, the positive in a way that comes out of it is I took such a long time out, and I wasn't pounding my body during those years. And I probably retired at 30. I didn't really pick up a racket for 3 or 4 or 5 years, but actually during that time I definitely recovered. I definitely gave myself time to heal and recover, so that was good. And then I actually started to play a little bit again, and played some local league matches, and then just played for enjoyment. But actually, because I had all that time out, I'm sure some injury might come to me at some point, but I'm 54 now. I think it's kind of preserved my body, so a lot of my contemporaries have had hip operations and knee operations, and I've managed to stay away from that. But I think if I, 100% I know, if I'd been going through the intensity of the training and competing, my body would not be what it is now. And I probably wouldn't be able to, sometimes I play, league matches or compete on the Masters, but I wouldn't be enjoying squash now. So that's how I see it, as a silver lining to think actually, now can compete and still play, and I think it also makes me really grateful as well to be able to, sounds a bit corny, but just, to be able to step on a squash court and play and hit the squash ball. To me, that's still, looking back on it, to think, I can still do that. Yeah. My age is because gives me a lot of pleasure.
You're still playing at quite a high
level. Yeah, reasonably high level. Yeah, for my age, I suppose. So I play. There's a London league I play in, and I still love, playing. That's always my passion, my love, and I still. So from that side of it, it's great to come here as well, and watch the squash and be still involved in it. And I think at one point, probably I was thinking, I never want anything to do with squash again.
Yeah, because I was going to say it could so easily kill your love for the game. It
can kill, and it probably did at one point. But that was another decision I had in my brain. I thought, well, how am I going to cope? How am I going to process this? Do I step away from the game forever and literally have nothing to do with it? Or do I kind of almost force even though it's difficult for me because it's, I'm putting myself in situations or, maybe watching matches, because it brings back memories of thinking, well, that could have been me or whatever. I kind of chose the latter to think, actually, I don't think my life would be as good without squashing it, even though it's kind of tough to go over. And I think that's been, definitely the right decision. Had to force myself initially to stay involved, but, I kind of went through that and then,
Sort of refound the love for the game.
Yes, exactly, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you sort of touched on it earlier. Your game was largely based on sort of fitter, maybe outlasting the opponent.
Yeah.
Do you think was sort of overtraining one of the contributing factors to the chronic fatigue, or
probably? Yeah, and I think it was the fact. I think the biggest fact was that I got this virus, the glandular fever, and I just didn't, recover rest in time. So it's probably more a mental. No, I won't say a mental issue. That sounds the wrong wording. But like I said before, my strength was my weakness because I just didn't give myself enough kind of respite and time to recover. Because I wanted to mentally keep pushing on. So that was probably the issue for me, rather than I would say the overtraining.
Okay,
I mean, it was more of my how I was mentally. Which, like I said, was a strength, was definitely a strength for me at certain times in my career, but then also kind of a weakness as well, because I just didn't give myself enough recovery time and rest time when I definitely needed to.
Because I think Johnny Williams had the same condition. Yeah. So I was sort of wondering, was there a correlation between that era of you know, it's kind of a period between the really old school Jeff Jonah and
Exactly,
the modern science in the game, where maybe the bodies were just being pushed a bit too much.
Yeah, I think there was definitely a bit of that. Yeah, there's definitely a bit of that. But I think it's, you know, Johnny's probably has got some similar kind of mindset traits to me. It's kind of an intensity in your brain that you want to keep pushing. But yeah, definitely now there's a lot more information about sports science and how you train. So you know, you would be able to take a lot more kind of advice of doing things right way from, you know, from a young age. You know, you would kind of know a lot more about how to, you know, plan, you know, your training and, you know, make sure you're doing hard training, obviously, but you're not doing kind of too many tough back-to-back sessions, which we definitely, you know, we're probably all guilty of doing that in the, you know, in the 90s. So you could say maybe I was a bit unlucky because you know, Johnny as well, we got, you know, conditions that we did, but I think everyone was, you know, probably if everyone looks back on it and for that period of time, probably a lot of players would say they probably overtrained, you know, even though they didn't get probably a physical illness, it probably didn't benefit their squash in some ways, the fact that they were, you know, day in, day out, working so hard. It benefited them to a certain, you know, could benefit them to a certain level, and there was some benefits of it, you know, especially mentally. It made you extremely strong, and obviously physically, and believe, you know, good as well. But yeah, the way that squash players train now, unbelievably hard, but it's a lot more scientific, more calculated, structured, and, you know, got proper rest periods in. And it's not probably every time they're going on court they're doing brutal sessions. They are doing brutal sessions because I've seen them train. I've seen Paul Cole do sessions. You know, they're absolutely brutal, but it's done in a more kind of measured way.
Well, yourself and Johnny would have been the shadow of the Jonah Jeff era of legendary physical training, but they might have been saved by the fact there weren't as many tournaments, as much competitive squash. And I guess, I mean, Jonah, for example, was sort of instrumental in your early days.
Yes.
And I guess the physical condition would have been driven by the likes of him.
True. Yeah. And then, you know, he kind of set the bar, you know, the right bar as well, because that's, you know, he set that bar. So maybe it was genetics, maybe it was a bit of luck, because, you know, no one trained harder than Jonah. And if you look at his training program, you're thinking, how's he not broken down? And I suppose he did break down with injuries at certain times and stages. So yeah, but I mean, that was the other thing. And back in my day, and Jonah's day as well, and, you know, even my era, players didn't last as long. You know, there's no question about that. So my era, when I was playing against Jahangir, Jansher, Chris Dittmar, there was Rodney Martin now, who, you know, coaches a number of the players. I think probably all of those players were kind of finished by 30. You know, Rodney Martin had a hip problem, eventually a hip operation at kind of 27, 28. Same with Chris Robinson, he had to stop. Same with Chris Dittmar, he stopped, I think, 27, 20. So even probably before 30, actually. So, and that was definitely a lot to do with the training that they were doing. And, you know, just the intensity. I mean, Australia, they were famed for doing the 400 repetitions, but, you know, I don't know how many Johnny got up to, but, you know, they could do up to, you know, 25, 30, 400 meters, you know, and then they're probably then training again in the afternoon, playing matches, and probably maybe even training in the evening, you know, day in, day out, that kind of, you know, that's, you know, you can't keep doing that for that long.
What would your own schedule have looked like, sort of at the peak?
I did less running, but I did lots of kind of pressure sessions and ghosting as well. That was and kind of court sprints, but pressure sessions and ghosting, that was my main training. So that would be, you know, that might last for kind of an hour and a half. Then, you know, maybe unwisely, I don't know, I'd then, to really challenge myself, I'd do that session and then play somebody straight afterwards, or maybe a 10-minute break, and then play somebody not as good as me, but, you know, still, maybe a world ranked player. So I'd try and, you know, do that session and then back it up straight afterwards with a game.
So you'd have a sort of 90-minute intense coaching session followed by a full-on practice match?
Maybe not 90 minutes, but, you know, maybe, you know, up to kind of like, you know, 45 minutes, 50 minutes ghosting session, bit of a rest, and then play a match afterwards, yeah. And I, you know, mentally I thought that was good, because you're playing tired. And obviously, when you get high up in the rankings, it's harder to find people to train. Well, you can find people to train with, but it's harder to have, you know, kind of replicate a match situation where, if I'm trying to beat Jansher, for example, I can't train with Jansher because he's, he won't train with me anyway, and he's, he's my main competitor. So I'm trying to recreate situations that put me in a place where it feels like it's similar to a match that I'm going to play. So yeah, that's what I would try and, replicate. And so lots of ghosting, lots of pressure sessions. I mean, I used to do sessions with Jonah where he would say to me, I don't know whether guys do this now, but he'd actually say, he wouldn't even tell me at the start of the session how long the session was going to be. So he said, because in his mind, it's like, you don't know how long a match is going to be, so I'm not telling you how long a pressure session is going to be. So he'll be doing, hard feeding and then ghosting within that. And, sometimes it might last for an hour, sometimes it might be an hour and a half, or sometimes it might be 2 hours. And like mentally, that's unbelievably tough because you're in a hard training session, you're thinking, well, I'm halfway through this. I've only got another 4 more sets to go. That's great. I can push through these last 4 sets. But that type of a session, you just don't know when it's going to end. Right. Yeah.
Was the majority of the training on court? Were you in the gym? Were you pushing weights?
I was in the gym a little bit. Yeah, not pushing too many weights, but more for me, a lot on court. And a lot of technique. I used to do a lot of solo practice as well. So loads of solo. People used to joke about how much solo practice I used to do. And again, I know players do that now, but I'd go on and do an hour and a half just hitting the ball, up and down the wall. Obviously trying to think about what I'm doing and working on ball control. So that's a good thing about squash. You can actually practice on your own and kind of raise your ball skill levels. And Jonah was a real big fan of solo practice, so he installed that into me at a young age. So I used to do lots of that. Did do some gym work, but I don't think the gym work was quite so nowhere near as scientific as what it is now. I mean, if I was playing now, I'll be doing a lot more gym work than what I did in my day. A lot more kind of core strength work. I would do a lot more of that, and like I say, strength, power work in the gym. I know Joel Makin does lots of that. That's the kind of training I would be doing if it was kind of my time now. But it just wasn't.
The game wasn't really at that point. It
wasn't at that point. There wasn't really the understanding about the training that would be a benefit. There's probably some mindset actually when I first started actually that doing weight training is not a good thing because it will slow you down. So that was, I seem to remember that was in my mind, but that was the wrong advice actually. That isn't, if you do the right type of weight training, that isn't the case, and it can be, it's a real benefit because it's good for injury prevention, but also strength and power, and it can really, really improve your kind of physical attributes. But in my day, it was, it wasn't. I don't think really anyone was. A lot of the Australians were doing these 400-meter sprints. Maybe they did some gym work, but it wasn't. You wouldn't have had a kind of like a strength and conditioning coach, which the guys would have now. So that's a big part of the improvement, I would say, the physicality of the players. So they have this, this understanding, and then they do, specific sessions on agility and speed. And our training was more the kind of the hard endurance and interval, hard interval training, but less. We probably we weren't as good at breaking down the different fitness elements of doing, speed work, agility work, stretching, strength work, and then also, we were just, it wasn't as scientific as what it is now, where you break it all down. It was more just, the tough.
And that sort of, your 45-minute ghosting or your pressure session with Jonah and an hour solo, is that, like, would that be every day of the week you'd be doing a
lot? Yeah, I would do that a lot of days of the week. Yeah, and then that's probably the morning session. Then you've also then do an afternoon session as well, where you're playing, you're practicing on court again for another couple of hours. So you're
sort of looking at 4 or 5 hours on court.
Probably 4 hours on court. Yeah, I would say. Yeah.
Where does your kind of connection with Jonah come in?
So I played at a club in a small little village just outside of Nottingham called Kegworth. My dad actually had a squash club. So back in the late 70s, early 80s, squash was booming. So he built a squash club. Our house was literally joined on to the squash courts. So we had a corridor that I could walk through from my bedroom into the squash courts. So I used to do that, and I suppose just naturally I would just go on the squash court, start hitting the ball and playing. I was about 8 at the time when I started, and I had a local coach, and he was friends with Jonah. And one day he said, why don't you come with me? He used to go and train with Jonah a little bit. So he said, one day, why don't you come with me and, I'll get you on court with Jonah. And at the time, Jonah was, big superstar. You know, everyone, you know, he probably was known throughout. Probably all, you know, all sports people would know. Even the general public would know Jonah's name. So, you know, massive. You know, even I knew at the age of 8, you know, who Jonah was. So I went on court with him. And then that's when it started, our kind of relationship, and then eventually, then he set up all the national training squads. Jonah did. So he set up the first and the 10 national training squad and then the 12. So I used to go to those training squads with him being, you know, overseeing the coaching. And then eventually he went to Millfield school. He was the head coach there. And then I went to Millfield as well and was with him there for periods. So, and then, and after that we, you know, kept in contact, and he was in Somerset, I was in Nottingham. So I didn't see him, you know, every single week, but we, you know, spent quite a lot of time with each other, and, you know, I'd go down and see him in Somerset, and, you know, would speak to me all the time and whatever. So then it.
Would I be right in saying you would have been one of the first players that he effectively, I guess, mentored to come up onto the tour?
I mean, probably British players, although having said that, he did I think he mentored quite a few kind of other British players. There was a lady called Lisa Opie. He had quite a lot of involvement with her. I think Wayne Bryars, some of the top English guys, well, before my time, he had, you know, involvement with them. But probably from a young, you know, in terms of mentoring, I'd say from a young age, you know, if someone young starting, probably, one of the first, you know, so, because like I say, I first met him when I was 8. So to have that long-term, you know, relationship from the age of 8 to then, you know, all the way through to being professional. Yeah, that was probably that's when Jonah got involved in junior squash, I suppose. So from that aspect, one of the first.
I mean, I feel like I don't know if I'm making a leap, but I imagine as a young lad to be around Jonah, who was, you know, synonymous for being mentally and physically incredibly tough to break.
Yeah.
I feel like that could be quite impressionable, and that the mental strength that was maybe your undoing would have been, you know, very much something that you saw in him to try and emulate.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, it probably was in me anyway. You know, the mentality side of things was kind of natural for me. But yeah, working with Jonah was definitely brought it out to a, you know, higher intensity, higher level. And, you know, when I first started kind of working with him, I was probably, you know, 14, 15 properly. He was, you know, mid-40s, but you know,
he was still been playing that
unbelievable. You know, playing massive events, but he was in unbelievable condition. You know, he was still, you know, ridiculously fit, and actually still competing against. You know, he used to have practice games with some of the top English guys. Used to come down and train with him when I was at Millfield, and he Jonah was 46, 47s, and he was still He wasn't playing tournaments at that point, but he was still beating them. You know, so I watched this and think, my God, you know, he's 46, 47, and still, you know, in practice games beating these guys, you know, top 10 in England, you know, who are in their 20s, and probably outlasting them as well. And you're thinking, well, that's, you know, in terms of someone to look up to, got that in your brain that's, you know, that's possible. You know, that obviously unbelievable amount of work, but it's, you know, it is possible. So all of that, you know, I was just very lucky that connection happened. Jonah was at that point of, you know, I even met him in the first place. I was lucky, but then, you know, Jonah then getting involved in junior squash, you know, and then me being involved with him, you know, it was all.
Because he'd have been running the SRA programming at the time, or
he was. You know, Jonah had his own view, so he wasn't really. You wouldn't really say he was. I think he did have some formal roles with England squash at different times, but the very first training squads he set up, he did it on his own actually. Or there was a couple of the guys who he worked with. But he was almost, in fact, it was called the unofficial under 10 squad because it wasn't actually part of the England setup.
Okay.
He kind of did it on the side, on his own with, like I say, there's a gentleman called Edward Poor, who was a cricketer, but, you know, passionate about squash. So they, you know, they kind of devised the whole program. Jonah wasn't really set up to be working in an organisation, I would say. That's probably the nicest way to put it. You definitely agree with me on that one. But yeah, I mean, his input was massive. I mean, he you know, way ahead of his time in some ways. I mean, the training squads he used to put on, the national training squads, because he was still competing a little bit at the time. You know, he would bring in Pakistani coaches, Egyptian coaches from Europe. So there was it wasn't just English coaches. He would bring in, you know, all these different coaches from all over the world. So you got that, you know, we didn't quite realize it at the time, but you're getting that exposure from not, you know, you just go into a training squad in Birmingham, but actually you're getting all this exposure from worldwide kind of expertise, which, probably even now it's hard for the players to get. So that's, obviously things progress in some ways, but you look back at that, you think, well, actually, there's probably no better setup than that if you're going to devise a training program and training squad system.
Wow.
To have this diversity of opinions and different ways of playing, and kind of bringing all that together was
an incredible setup to be in as a kid. And you said you obviously growing up in a basically living in a squash club.
That's right. Yeah.
Were you was it a natural talent that you had then as a kid, or?
Probably some natural kind of hand-eye, coordination thing. I played a bit of tennis as well when I was younger, and golf, and I was good at all those sports. I played quite a bit of golf when I was young, and I was good at that. So I probably definitely had the hand-eye coordination. I wasn't that coordinated in many sports, but just but for a racket and a ball, I seemed to have the coordination. So that was natural. But also I had the ideal to have those facilities, like I say, where I've got squash courts, right? So I would just walk on the squash court on my own, pick a racket, play, and squash was booming at that point, so there were lots of people to play against, and it was kind of almost like an obvious thing for me to do, really, because they were just courts were, like I say, right by almost by my bedroom, really. They were just there. So
obvious to play the game, not so obvious to play a two-handed backhand and forehand. So where does the infamous double-handed shot come from?
Well, that's obviously very, very unusual. Well, actually, that comes back to my dad owning the squash club, and I think probably for the first year and a half of me picking a squash racket, I don't think my dad even saw me play, because I used to just go on court on my own. When I was like 7 or 8, I used to jump on the court on my own, and I hadn't even seen squash. I didn't know what squash was, but I used to just like I'd watch a little bit, but I'd go on court on my own. I was small, even for my age, I was small and tiny, and probably a bit weak for my age. And in those days, you had the wooden rackets, heavy wooden rackets. So I just started to play two-handed on both without knowing that was right or wrong. I just did it.
Sort of because you couldn't really hold it?
I didn't have the power to hold it with one hand, so just, I just played two-handed and didn't really think anything of it, because I just thought, well, that's how I can hit the squash ball, because that's easier for me, because I'm kind of too weak basically to hit with one hand. And then for the first year and a bit, I just used to go on court on my own. I don't think I even played anybody. I just hit the ball on my own. And then by that time, when I started to play people, I developed this technique, behind closed doors almost, and then I just and kind of carried it on from there.
Is it the kind of thing that was? Did people try and coach it out of you?
Yes, everyone did. Yeah. Apart from Jonah, actually. So Jonah was the only one who, he probably did. I don't know whether he really deep down wanted me to not play like that, but he was. Yeah, he kind of kept me. He didn't try and stop me, but he tried to make sure that I was practicing kind of single-handed shots as well. So I think probably he was trying to get me to convert, but in a subtle way. So his idea was, okay, if you've got certain strengths of hitting, because there's certain strengths about it, hitting two-handed shots, maximize those, but also where you've got weaknesses. So the reach obviously is a weakness, because you can't reach as well with two hands as one hand. With the one hand, practice one-handed shots as well. So that's how he kind of approached it. But every other coach would say, you basically not going to get any better if you keep playing like this. So I had training reports saying, well, if Peter doesn't change his technique, when he gets to under 14s, he's not going to be able to, compete and play. And if he doesn't get to, the next report, actually, under 16s, if he doesn't change, he's going to do this. If he gets to, if he's a professional player, he's not going to be able to cope. So I had that the whole kind of time. And I don't know, I obviously was stubborn, didn't listen, but I was winning junior tournaments. So in my mind, I'm thinking, well, I'm still, I'm winning. Well, why would I want to really change this?
100%.
So that's how I thought of it. But
it sort of maybe developed into its own weapon in some ways as well. It's slightly harder to read for the opponent.
Yeah. I mean, definitely there's, like I said, there's weaknesses because of the reach. You're probably expanding more energy because you're hitting the ball with two hands. So that's kind of harder. But the deception is the biggest strength. So, being able to have quite a short swing and then generate quite a lot of power, or quite a lot of, being able to then put the ball short or put the ball long is definitely a strength. And and people not being able to just, read your game, because you can hit the ball a bit closer to your body, so you can kind of cover shots and people can't quite see where the ball's going. So sometimes, you'd play people and they just, any advantage in squash where you can, because obviously everyone's so fit, quick, and mobile, and can get the ball. You've got an advantage of deception. For squash, that's a really big advantage, I think, because it just means it doesn't matter how fit and quick you are. If you don't quite know where the ball's going, sometimes you're late getting the ball, or you just can't even get the ball back. Where if it's kind of rhythmical and everyone can see what's going on, it's a bit easier. So that was a definite, that part of it was a definite strength. Some people really struggle to read my game, especially the first time I played them. They, go completely the wrong way and not know where the ball's going. that was an advantage.
One of the things you said earlier, I wanted to ask you as well. You said kind of about your generation, Simon Park, yourself, Del Harris, English guys that were getting to the very top of the rankings, aged 18, 19. You sort of touched on it, the players were retiring at 30, but if you look at the recent British players, especially your Nick Matthews, your Laura Massaros, they're past their 30s before they're getting to that stage of the rankings. Is that what would you attribute that shift of English players getting to the top young to English players getting to the top in their elder years?
No, it's an interesting change. I mean, part of it is definitely the sports science and the way people train. So it means that they can peak a bit later. I mean, ideally that age of 30, 31, 32 probably should be the peak time, because you've then got the experience, you've got the know-how about how to play the game. And if you can keep the physical side, up to scratch like you were when you were younger, then to me that does seem like the optimal time to be at your peak, because you've got, like I say, you've got the experience, you've got the understanding of the game, and still the physical side. So it's not a surprise really that would, because of their understanding of how to look after their bodies and train, etc. That would happen. And I don't know, Nick Matthew maybe less so, but Laura Massaros, I don't think she was quite as good a junior as some of the other girls of her age. So it does, it's just the way it works out is just different for different people. She matured bit later and got better and improved and then became world champion and world number one. So people's journeys can be different. Maybe some Jonah Barrington now, he's extremely young, he's 20, and he's right up there. So he might break the mold back to someone like Del Harris and Simon Park a little bit. So it can change from generation to generation. But it's. I don't think it's a disaster for I don't think any player should feel under pressure that if they're not right at the top of the game at 19, 20, that doesn't mean they're not going to get there later. And having said that, some people might become really good really young. But Joel Making is a good example of that, isn't he? He's got better and better and better almost each every year that goes by. He gets better and better, works on his game, and
it almost feels like Joel, Paul, Nick. You take a lot of the great, especially male players, I guess, of recent generations. It almost feels like the 26, 27, 28, they're adding layers. It feels like in your generation, it was almost you were at your peak at 18, 19.
Yes, yeah. There's a bit of that, yeah. And I think there's some advantage as well of players kind of improve, maybe not having such, obviously some players have got unbelievable junior careers. Mustafa Sassal, world champion, junior champion, etc. And that's great. He's. But I would imagine somebody like if you're peaking, if you're that good that young, it's probably hard to then play. I don't know, into your mid-30s. I mean, it can be done. I mean, Mohamed Shabaghi is 34. He's world junior, so it can be done, but it's probably harder. And for some, it depends what mindset you've got. But for some people, if you're always used to winning as a junior and being at the very top, and then all of a sudden when you're playing professionally, the players start beating you, or even then actually some younger players than you stop. So, players that you could always beat then start beating you. Some players don't cope with that very well.
Yeah, 100%.
And it's quite it's quite difficult for you to think, actually, I used to be the best junior in the world or one of the best. And then now I'm losing to someone even younger than me, or someone who I always used to beat. And then some players don't cope with that very well. So actually someone like Paul Cole or Joel, I think the nice thing, well, obviously they've worked unbelievably hard and got better and better, but the good thing about them is they've had kind of less pressure on them in a way, because there was less expectation. They were, no one was saying they're going to be the best player in the world. And then, they can kind of in their own minds, they can think, actually, I'm making progress all the time when they start their physically and get better and better. And, they don't feel like people are catching them up or they're going backwards. So, yeah, it probably is almost like a nicer journey in a way. It might not generate so much success as young, but actually in the long term, it's, maybe it's more sustainable. And
just in general, how do you sort of view the way the game itself has changed in the time since you were at the top to now? I mean, the long attritional, it almost felt like in the 90s watching it that, you're going to be on court for 90 minutes to win a match, and then that the attrition and the grind was the way to win.
Yeah.
How have you kind of watched the game evolving over that period of time? What do you see as being the main differences?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'll go back to what I said earlier. I think it's the physical side, not necessarily the endurance of the players, because I think players back in the 90s were just as fit in terms of endurance-wise as what they are now. But the kind of the speed and the strength and the overall mobility definitely changed, I would say, in a positive way. Which is, and then the rackets have changed as well. They're a lot lighter now. Even though we had kind of graphite rackets back in the 90s, the rackets are a lot lighter now. But overall, it's become faster, more dynamic. The movement and the speed in and out of the corners. That's unbelievable to watch. I'm not saying that didn't happen in my day, but So that side of the game has changed. I think as well with the rackets being lighter, it's kind of slightly easier to, I wouldn't say put the ball away, but it's a bit more forgiving, I would say. If you've got a heavier racket, maybe you've got to be a bit more technically precise to kind of to hit certain shots. I think the basic game is not, even though there might have been more length hitting, the basic game, the game is still the same. You know what I mean? It's maybe quicker, but it's still the same. People ask me, would somebody like Jansher Khan, how would he do it in today's game? And there's a few players that I think would fit in perfectly into, he might take a couple of months to adjust, but he would walk right into today's game and be right at the top in my book. And be tough for anyone to beat. And if not, he might be, still the dominant player. So yeah, it's, I think if you've got the qualities of being a top player, you would generally translate that to, maybe not every player, but a lot of players could, especially the real greats of the game can translate their game.
When you're watching the current guys playing, you say, it's maybe a little bit faster, rackets are different, maybe a bit more dynamic. Is there a bit of you that would be like, I wish I wish this was my time? Do you feel like you would have enjoyed playing in this current era?
I think so, because I still play a little bit. No, obviously nothing like the level now, but I still play some guys who, maybe a few years ago, not so much now. Young guys coming up. Still, if you play the right quality shots, it's people don't like it, and you hit it extremely good length, and the ball's dying, and you hit unbelievable quality to the front. Sometimes the simple, although it doesn't look so amazing. Squash is, I think, quite strange. Can be quite deceiving, strange game, because you could watch a match and there's cross-court nicks and there's unbelievable shots at the front, and everyone's thinking, well, this is an amazing game. These are amazing players, much better than previous generation, because it all looks so attacking and so exciting. But actually, if you break it down and sometimes see actually where the ball is landing, can be a bit deceiving. Even in my day, you would have, you'd have unbelievably talented players. Sometimes at his best, Rodney Martin. You'd watch him one day, think, well, he's unbeatable because he's hitting the ball in the nick and whatever, and from all over the court and deception. And then he plays Jansher. I mean, not all, he did beat Jansher, but sometimes he might be made to look quite, not ordinary. But you think, well, that's because he hit the ball. So it's it's not always
the fundamentals are still the same.
Fundamentals are still the same, exactly. So it's not always for the person. I wouldn't say for the lay person, but the person who maybe understands squash, but not has played at at the very top level. Sometimes hard for them to understand actually what the differences between somebody who looks unbelievably exciting and like I say, shots going from all over the place and cross court nicks and whatever. That's not always the it's not always, and even the faster game as well. I say the game is faster. I think it is faster, but even the speed isn't always sometimes. But better. It doesn't mean it's better. I'm just saying it's faster. It's not always better. But yeah, like I said, the one thing that's improved 100% in my book is just the all-round athleticism of the players, and that's partly to do with the training. And I think the women's game as well, that's noticeable improvement from my day. We didn't have a joint tour, so I didn't watch as much women's squash, but the women now, the level now, without a question, that's a totally different league in my book to what the women's game like was, in the 90s, 2000s.
Jansher obviously has that reputation as being one of the best movers in the game. Is he the best that you've seen, you reckon?
He's for me, yeah.
You would have played Jahangir.
I played Jahangir as well. Yeah, I mean, I never played Jahangir at his very peak. So I played Jahangir a few times, and first time I played him, he kind of like 25 minutes crunched me off the court. I did actually beat him. The last time we played, I beat him, but he was kind of coming, definitely coming towards the end of his career. But yeah, Jansher for me was the best player, and also because he kind of evolved as well. I mean, Jahangir obviously evolved an unbelievable play. He played at an unbelievable intensity. Most of the time, he could blast people off court with unbelievable accuracy and power and precision. But Jansher kind of evolved his game. He started off as more of a retriever, but then actually became, halfway through his career, became deadly as well with a racket. So he could put the ball away, and he had unbelievable understanding of where his opponent was on court and when to hit the ball into spaces, and so he kind of learnt that as well as he went throughout his career. So and for me, that's why he's the best, because he evolved his game in different kind of generations. And the movement thing, I think I'm sure most of even the current players would admit, if they've seen him on video, don't think there's been a better mover around a squash court, a more fluid mover on a squash court than Jansher. I don't think I've never seen it. In today's game, you probably got Diego being the closest to that, I would say, in terms of
Farag
as well. Yeah, no, true. Actually, I know he's, but for me, not quite as kind of economical as Jansher. But yeah, unbelievable mover as well. So you probably got since Peter Nicol as well. Actually, was an unbelievable, in a slightly different way, but an unbelievable mover as well. Very, very efficient and kind of balanced. But yeah, I think Jansher for me had the best movement, and then like I say, as he went on, the best, almost the best court craft as well. So in terms of an all-round player, all-round game, difficult to pick someone better than him.
What was it like? I mean, it sounds like a crazy question, as you were number 2 in the world at the time, but what was it actually like going on court with peak Jansher Khan? I mean, it does sound like a crazy question, but do you go on believing you can win? Or at times is it just, I just want to hang on to this guy as close as I can?
Yeah, no, you have to. I mean, when I first started competing against him, I probably didn't realistically think I was going to win. But then, I was getting close to him, and we had lots of, 3-2 battles. So, I was getting closer. So you've got to believe, you can win. So yeah, you'd go in with the mindset, I'm going to try and win today. And, but yeah, it's easy to kind of think like that. Before you start, you can convince yourself as much as you like, but it all comes down to the practicalities of, how good you are against how good he is. You can convince yourself, obviously this is where the psychology is important. You need to go in a positive mindset, but go in the most positive mindset, if you haven't got the right game and the right skills and the right, you're going to lose, so this is kind of as simple as that. But yeah, you would do, yeah. But I mean, that was the other thing for me, going back to my technique against a lot of players, I'd feel like I'd got some advantage with the two-handed shots because I'm deceptive, or could be deceptive for some players. Mm-hmm. I never, even from the very first time I played Jansher, I'd try and be deceptive, and it just almost felt like, well, that's kind of a waste of time, really, because he just, he knows exactly where the ball's going. So that, again, that's a, quite a unique thing, really, because he can adapt to, you played Brett Martin, who was very deceptive. It looked like he could read him like a book, so he had, players who would really struggle with kind of deception and not knowing where the ball's going. He for him, it was, kind of quite easy, second nature. Nothing, that didn't, so that's hard to mentally,
pretty demoralizing.
Demoralizing, yeah, because you got to think actually that my strengths have kind of been negated quite early on here, and what I can do against most players in terms of a weapon is not really a weapon actually against him. So I'm gonna have to kind of reevaluate what I need to do.
You said earlier there that you played, when Jonah was young, you said he played against, the sort of rising English players. I believe do you still do something similar? I believe you have been involved in playing some of the rising English talent on occasion, maybe on an annual basis. I'm not sure of the exact details.
Yeah, no, I have over the years. I've played quite a few junior. In fact, actually, even a couple of weeks ago, I played a young guy who's plays at Wimbledon. I live in Central, and he plays in Wimbledon. He's number 1 under 17s at the moment. Maybe he's number 2. And yeah, I've had a couple of hits with him. So, that's quite an interesting stage because obviously I'm 54, he's only 16. But, well, we actually have, quite close games.
Yeah.
So that's quite good. But yeah, there's an annual, I haven't played it the last couple of years, but there's an annual match every year at the Queen's Club where the England under 19 team play kind of a mixture of, I suppose, older guys. And that's kind of like an annual fixture. Tim plays it sometimes, actually. So we play against all the kind of the top England team. So that's I go to I've known Robert Owen for a long time as well. So not so much recently, but over the years I've gone to his academy and played the junior players that he's got there, and I'll go on call with him and play them. Especially some of the younger ones. It's getting harder for me now because I'm getting older. So they're getting better. So it's But yeah, over the years, I've
is it quite enjoyable to sort of put yourself on there with the new generation and just sort of
it is.
There's no school like the old school.
No, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I enjoy. I mean, it's a good kind of it's a good challenge for me in a way, but also it's nice to see young kids trying to get better and play and improve, and hopefully they can gain some they can gain something from it as well, because you often I think the real benefit is playing youngsters and then chatting to them afterwards and giving them they might not take it all on board what you say, but giving them advice about their game and how what you think they're doing well and how they can improve, and just general advice. So that's I like doing that. That's quite rewarding because you can
do you feel like over the years where you've done that, have you seen it's sort of lamented that England squash isn't quite at the level it was in your era, maybe even the Nick Matthew, James Willstrop era? I mean, have you seen a decline, for want of a better term, in the level of juniors here?
Probably, yes. I don't know, it's sad to say, but it's you had kind of ours, me, Dal Harris, Simon Park, Chris Wogan. That was a very strong era, and then Nick Matthew, James Willstrop. That was even stronger. So that they were real kind of golden eras of British, English squash. I think part of it is just squash has dropped off in terms of participation in the UK, and I think that I just look at the numbers of people playing, kids, and it's kind of not rocket science. If you've got less of a pool of people to pick from, it's then harder to pick out the top, the kind of the top players. So I think that's been part of the challenge of England. It's not necessarily England squash, it's just the challenge of, life and, maybe other kids doing other sports or getting into other things. So that's, I think that's difficult. But it's, we've got Jonah Barrington, obviously, he's only 20, but, he's from in my mind, he's going to be, he's getting right up there now, but he's, it's kind of an obvious thing to say now because, he's on the road. But, even a couple of years ago, I'm thinking, well, he's got something really special, and he's, as long as he doesn't get injured and everything goes well, he can make it right to the very top. So there are English players who've got the potential. It's just probably the depth of, in my day and Nick Matthews' day, the quality of the depth of the players was higher. Just like I say, probably because there's a bigger pool of people to pick from.
And then obviously the more players you've got at your level, the more competition you've got to drive yourself.
Yeah, and that's a big thing, and that's why Robert Owen's academy is so successful, because obviously him as a coach, but also he gets so many players to come together. And that's in my day, I was based in Nottingham, and there was Alex Goff used to train there. There was John White trained there, Simon Park. We had a whole group of Derek Ryan. We had a whole group of players, 7 or 8 professionals, all training with each other. Robert Owen's got it now in Birmingham, but it's those kind of setups that are really good, because you just got all the players playing with each other, training with each other, competing, pushing each other along. I mean, Egypt have got the same thing. That's why they're so successful. They've got groups of, areas in Egypt, Alexandria and Cairo, where they're all, got these big base of players and competition. And then you also then got the junior players watching all these older players training, and so it just then feeds itself to
and you can see the path clearly, so you can
see the path. You watch the top, the older, the professionals training as well, so you can pick up things, and you might get on court with them sometimes, and so all of that is just perpetuates from kind of one generation to another. If you can get that concentration of players in an area, that's where you can get some really good results.
Do you think the UK, England can get back to that sort of level in the game?
I'm hoping so, yeah. And I think partly it is down to we're almost, to get to the top elite, we've almost got to take 2 steps back and think about grassroots squash as well, and getting more people playing the game. And I think if we can do that, that might take a bit of time. Obviously, it's not going to happen overnight, but if we can do that, then yes. Because still we've got all the history of squash in England and UK, and still lots of good coaching here, and players with knowledge and expertise. So you should have the kind of the setup, and obviously lots of squash clubs and squash courts still. So you should have the setup for it to be to make it work. You just need the like I say, partly it's the numbers, and then you need people who people like Robert Owen who have got the expertise, but also the drive and the interest to dedicate their life to working with juniors and producing juniors, and you need individuals like that around as well, and that's maybe sometimes a bit of luck whether that happens or not, but England squash can help with all that, but sometimes it's outside of things can happen. England squash could be doing all the right things, and still things don't
come together,
or they might not be doing all the right things, and it's just you've got a group of individuals in different clubs, great coaching, and and that can make things work as well.
Well, we're still waiting for the next double-handed English player to come through. Pete, maybe the first one we see will be the next big English superstar.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that. Like I said earlier, I don't think I'll be. Yeah, I'm not promoting the. I'm not. I won't want to promote my life or my game with anybody. I think I'll leave all that pain and good stuff as well to myself. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Peter, thank you very much for your time today. It's been fantastic to chat and dive back. Great to see you on the Squash TV cameras recently as well, and. Just hopefully see you around at a few more events, and best of luck with everything on and off the squash court.
Definitely, yeah, and good luck with the magazine. I do like the look of it. I'll take that back with me tonight.